Okay, hopefully we're live with the latest edition and the last for this year, the 23rd edition of the Data Value Show. This week's edition, it's going to be looking into the future. We've got the 2024 Data Crystal Ball, and who better to talk about that than the Seattle data guy, Ben Rogojan. Hey Ben, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. How about yourself?
Not too bad. Yeah, normally in the previous editions, I normally get chatting too long in the background and forget to go live. This time we were at the wire trying to get my audio working, so we didn't get a chance to have a big debrief. But yeah, for the audience that don't know, this is Ben Rogojan, the Seattle data guy. I had the pleasure of meeting him probably a couple of years ago when I gate crashed Joe Reese's show. Since then, I've been following his content and caught up a few times in the past. So, Ben, do you want to give the audience a bit of an intro, the ones that don't know you, anyway?
Yeah, sure. So, for those who don't know me, like I said, you'll find me online as the Seattle data guy, and basically, my current focus is helping companies set up their end data infrastructure. But I also put out a lot of content. So, if you're just looking to learn more about data engineering or data in general, you'll probably find either a blog post or a LinkedIn post somewhere about me sharing on that. Before that, I worked at Facebook, worked at a startup, and a little more in the healthcare space. So that's the general kind of space that I've worked in.
Well, I'll have to say your content is top class. You put a lot out there, and I know you've helped a lot of people with their journey in their data engineering space, and more than that as well with all of your YouTube content and Medium posts. I don't know how you get it all out there. You must never sleep. But yeah, today, and I think it's always good to try and predict what's going to be happening. We're not going to. No guarantees for any of this stuff, so we probably should put a warning out that that these are our views, and yeah, please don't take them to the word. But we want to give a bit of an overview of what we see happening in a few areas, and I think that was out in the invite or the for the show details. The first one, we'll probably talk about the cloud vendor wars. So when we take the cloud vendor wars and talking about the Amazon versus Google versus Azure versus other ones that may be out there as well, but they're the big three. So how do you see the future of each of these cloud vendors playing out?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is GCP just needs to keep products out there long enough so people don't get afraid that they're going to take it away. I think Azure continues, I think, to gain market share, especially on the enterprise side, which is something we've been seeing for a little bit.
Yep.
If we're looking mostly at the data side, I always feel like GCP's one big win is BigQuery. It feels like that's always been something like people might not use GCP, but they'll still use BigQuery. Like, it's like, well, we have everything on AWS, but we use BigQuery for our data warehouse. So I always find that kind of interesting how that ends up playing a role at a lot of companies, where it's like sometimes it's still people just picking these hybrid solutions because they like one specific tool more versus maybe something else, even if there's some analogous pair there. So I think that's something that continues to happen, and I see that companies of all sizes where they'll just have a hybrid of everything because they like different solutions for one reason or the other. But I think that generally happens more on the AWS and GCP side versus Azure. I feel like if you're using Azure, a lot of people tend to just use Azure. Yeah, I mean, I think they're continuing to compete. I think people are starting to find more ways to not just have hybrid clouds, but hybrid everything, where it's like, okay, now we have certain things in the cloud and certain things on-prem because it's more cost efficient. We have more data. We have more understanding of like where each might be best. And so I think people are also starting to make those decisions a little bit more, where before it was like, oh, the cloud is just cheaper. But I think we found out that in some cases, maybe that's not true. And so I think people are reassessing that and figuring out, okay, where is it cheaper and where is it not? And where can we actually win that?
That's some really good points. And I think from my experience and seeing how each of those cloud providers have got that market share, and obviously AWS being the the leader in that. But Azure, what I've seen, it's a lot of them. It's that very easy to migrate what they had on premise. If they're running on the Microsoft stack, it was easy to do that lift and shift. And you're interesting what you mentioned about Google being that, BigQuery being their, the flagship piece that things gravitate around. I think that was very much of what I saw. Everyone who was using Google Analytics, it's extended straight away because it was easy enough for them to go and get that Google Analytics and put it into BigQuery, and then maybe other things got added to it. It's interesting to see how they will try and grab more market share. Another thing you mentioned there was GCP not keeping its product out long enough. So there's that. Do you go and build on something that you don't know is going to be there in the future? So it'd be interesting to see how they move. I think the other interesting thing you mentioned was where bare metal comes into it. Where it's good just to run this stuff on your own tin or tin that's managed for you, maybe in a different capacity, but in a data center, not managed by one of those cloud vendors. And I think this touches on to something that I think I predict happening a bit more in the future. And I put a post about the other day was information lifecycle management, and when's it the right time to go put your data onto which location or which storage, which it's that old architecture job that you feel, okay, right, this is to satisfy our non-functional requirements to achieve what we need. This is the best way of tiering our data in different locations. Iceberg's advances, of having those three different access paths. Snowflake doesn't quite support accessing all of them, but I'm pretty sure at some stage they will, and I'm sure Databricks has got a similar path it's going on. So I see. If you're going to do some predictions, I think you'll see maybe Azure catching up in some areas, but I think you're right. We'll also see a movement from cloud storage to even colder storage or even on-premise storage at some stage, especially with LLMs as well. There's no point to send all the data up to the cloud to go and train something when if you've already got the data local anyway. You might as well train it on something that you may get more bang for your buck, as you say.
Yeah. I think that it is interesting. Just seeing the the interesting hybrid approaches that are coming out, where people are trying to figure out how to have the best of all worlds. And I think that's you add in the challenge and complexity of like, okay, now you've got 5 different places that you're essentially managing what used to be managed in one environment. Now you're managing like 5. Can it really equate to cost savings in terms of like, okay, we're saving on the cloud and hardware, are we spending more on people? So I think that's always kind of the interesting trade-off if you've got so many things going on in so many places.
Again, that's another interesting point of the days of getting requirements or understanding the access path of the data to understand the best way of providing it. We had these leads quite on to the next one in a minute anyway, but the cloud data platforms where you just stick all the data inside of that, you don't have to worry about it, it's all compressed. But with that comes you need to go and get the data into those platforms. So if you've got it all spread around in different locations, products like Dremio or Starburst that provided that access to go across those many locations, and even some of them supporting maybe accessing it on premise. Do we need that cataloging of where all that data is to make sure that you're getting you're not duplicating that data and making it over complex? Well, that's maybe the rise of some catalogs. So I think so we talked about the cloud vendor wars. I think the other one, which is quite linked a little bit to it, is the cloud data platform wars. And when I say the cloud data platforms, the two main, I suppose there's 3 really, is your Databricks, your Snowflake, and there's the Azure platform now with Fabric in it as well. Probably the 3 big players. I don't know if you'd consider GCP. Maybe we'll put it in there as a 4th one as well. But how do you see these 4 players panning out in 2024?
Sure. I think it's interesting that like it's hard to think of any other players, even though I'm sure Oracle has their market share that maybe is a little bit harder to parse out. And, it's just easy when that's all that company does to be like, yeah, this is, clearly they've got market share. And same thing with like you brought up like BigQuery. It's like, oh yeah, it's easy because again, BigQuery has this interesting like flagship appeal where it's like, okay, you might not think about all the other components in GCP, but I think of BigQuery. I think what I've often, again, there's a lot of companies just operating in a hybrid approach where it's like, okay, we use Databricks to manage our data science and machine learning workflows, and we use often Snowflake as kind of either data mart or data warehouse, just something that adds a layer that's more like manageable from someone who's a data person. I think I continue to use these solutions, and like if I look at Databricks and I try playing around with it, it's like, okay, this is very geared towards someone who wants to do like data science workflows and build, things of that nature. Whereas when you look at Snowflake, it's like, okay, this is meant for someone who wants to manage data and, maybe build some dashboards on top of it. And obviously they both argue that that's not the case when they both do everything. But in terms of like what they do well, I think that's generally what I found. It's like, it's much easier to write Python and workflows and in Databricks, and it's much easier to manage SQL and data management processes in Snowflake. And again, a lot of companies I've seen just hybrid, have some sort of hybrid model. I had one person I think say like something along the lines of like, Databricks is where we let all the essentially this, people want to do the complex things, because it's a little bit cheaper and in theory, and whereas Snowflake is for slightly less technical people to some degree when we let them like analysts and things like that work on it.
And I think you're right. And I think the analogy is they've both been driving tanks in each other's direction, and now they're both on each other's lawn. They worked very well together at the beginning, Snowflake and Databricks, in that best of breed of having that workload in that more data mart, data warehouse sort of use case, and then using Databricks for some of the advanced machine learning complex pieces. And the two work very well together. Unfortunately, I think the sales rep there, I don't think they'd ever agree going in there selling it that you should go the hybrid model. Even though it is probably a good balanced approach for different work at the moment, and the way they're both going, maybe they'll be good as each other in both of those directions. But I think you're right in that they've started both at that different level. So obviously with the other, and great you mentioned, there are other alternatives out there. IBM have got their stack and Oracle have got their stack as well. But yeah, they're not as well known. And the Exadata, I know they've got to put their own, but you have to run it in Oracle Cloud. So it's you're still just renting an Exadata inside their data center to some degree. But it does. They're getting there. They're getting that direction. But I think the interesting player this year that Microsoft come in with its Fabric now. Which I think shows the end of its really like strategic partnership with Databricks. So Databricks was always part of its Azure platform. I think now with the Fabric coming into it, and I think some failed attempts for them to try to acquire Databricks over the years has led them down a path of, okay, well, we'll roll our own. Have you played around much with that? Have you seen much going with the Fabric yet?
I haven't had to play around with it too much outside of its normal products. I think it's interesting as when you started to say, it's failed. I thought you were going to say it's failed launch of like Azure Synapse Analytics. And when I say that, I mean it's marketing launch, because I think that like Fabric is a good like antithesis to its like Microsoft's first attempt to essentially launch. I think it was like, and even now I don't recall which one's which, Azure Synapse Analytics, because it went through like these weird phases where it was like, okay, we have Azure Data Warehouse, then it's Azure Synapse Analytics. Now the whole thing is Azure Synapse Analytics, and like you're like, okay, so which piece is what piece? So I think that was one of the things that they kind of failed to launch correctly, and I think it never stuck because of it. I mean, I'm sure at enterprises it did, but it just never grabbed it never grabbed any airspace. Whereas now, like Azure Data Fabric has, like, people talk about it, whether it's because they've got a lot of influencers, talking about it, whether it's because they just, figured out some other way of letting it out there. I think they did a far better job. Probably also because it was connected to like OpenAI. People are already talking about Microsoft. And then like whatever it was, like a few months later, it was like, oh, and we also have this Fabric thing. And I think that was the cadence of that order, if I recall.
Yeah, I think I did a joke saying that they need to release Microsoft Data Fabric Softener as well to ease the pain of migrating from previous iterations of the Azure platform. But they have, I've seen in the past, they haven't been very good at that migration path. So where they keep changing, I mean, they had HD Insights back there before for some of this unstructured piece. Then they had the relationship with Databricks. They had ADSL1, the ADSL2 was a very tough migration to move you, from the different data lakes for the versioning of that. So, yeah, it's a very easy one to predict. They need to get better at that, so they can't get any worse. So let's see if they can actually provide all the pieces of the puzzle that actually work together out of the box, which they haven't up until now. So I think the other thing that I've seen as well, and picking on Databricks and Snowflake specifically, is the extension of the capabilities that they provide. And I think we've all said that some of the problems, and I agree, the modern data stack became very complicated. You had all of these moving parts, and I always compare it to the old days of where I'm from, is, you had an Oracle database, you had Informatica doing your ETL, and you probably had a reporting tool like Cognos. It was simple. It was 3 piece the puzzle. But those times have gone, and good job. It all had its limitations. But when we went too fragmented with the modern data stack, with thousands of different components all doing different bit, having a reverse ETL as well as an ETL tool, and I think and they've all been built around these two giants, Snowflake and Databricks, the ecosystem that they've gravitated around. But you've seen gradually that they're releasing functionality that makes these products redundant. And maybe that the more zombie startups that have had a funding, but there is no need for that product anymore with some of the new features coming out. I think one I'd highlight is the ability to read external files or external tables. So where we'd have Starburst or Dremio or something being that engine on top. Obviously, it still doesn't support on-premise, but maybe that's on the roadmap. So if I'm going to give a prediction, probably both of them will support accessing external storage, or even a colder storage using Iceberg, and that's probably what's probably going to happen there. But where else do you see them eating into the ecosystem of the modern data stack?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like there's definitely places that they're attempting to kind of take market share. Like, I don't know if I haven't had to use it yet, but they're trying to have all their own integrations, right? Whether it's Salesforce or a few others where they're just trying to provide their own integrations, which will, if I don't know if you've seen anyone actually roll that out yet, but if they start rolling that out successfully, I imagine it'll make the most sense in the bigger data plays. So it's like, Salesforce, things like if you've got an application database and Postgres, like the big plays where it's like, it was a lot of data. If you're on Fivetran, you're probably spending, a few $100,000 a year trying to migrate that data, or not migrate, but just put it into your data warehouse. So like if Snowflake can do it, and if they can make it cost effective, which is the key, and easy, like people I think would make that switch pretty quickly. Again, I haven't heard people talking about it, so it makes me feel like it hasn't happened yet, and I haven't had to use it yet. I think the other thing, and this is something that I have definitely dabbled with a little more, is like, and this is less to do with I think the modern data stack, and more to do with just the old way of doing things, is like data sharing. I think continues to be something that if you can implement it well, can be a huge time save, just because otherwise people are doing the exact same thing they've always done this is why I'm not sometimes worried about technology going too fast, which is SFTP data around, right? Like, we're just going to push data here and put it in this server, and we'll extract, we'll write a query on our side that then extracts it, that pushes it here, that you'll write your script on your side that pulls that and pushes it and, transforms it, whatever you need to do. Whereas if you can do it in a data sharing process where it's just like that table now exists in your Snowflake instance or wherever, it's just so much smoother. So I think that's something that has been a little more effective and I've seen actually done.
I think with some recent experience on some of the stuff, I've seen now that with the introduction of database roles within Snowflake, whereas before you had account roles, and then you'd have to go and apply the security after the share the other side, which means you can't control anything with masking on your side. It has to go and be put on the other side it's being shared with. Having database roles that can actually cross shares as well, so that they're actually owned by the database is really simplifying the ability to make products that you can share with the client. So I think you're right. I think there's with that in reverse ETL becomes less of a thing, even though I was never a big supporter of that as a product. So and I know that they've done some good marketing and supplied some toasters, or it was a panini press, I believe, to Lauren.
I believe so. I did not receive one, so I'm unsure of the benefits of reverse ETL.
It senses a high touch to look in. Me and Ben, neither of us got a panini press, so we'll be happy to accept it, but we still won't support your product that much. So I think so. And there's other areas I'm seeing, and I think maybe Databricks is more has a catalog included as part of it, whereas Snowflake still has relationships with quite a few of it. Elation, I know, being one, and there's others at Atlan. I know that Data.World as well. There's lots of other catalogs out there, but Snowflake still doesn't provide you one as part of it. So maybe that's what. I think the orchestration piece is an interesting one as well. So again, I don't know Databricks as well. I believe it has some level of orchestration that you can do within it. And I suppose you could say Snowflake has it with its streaming and its tasks to some degree, but I think that's a natural extension for people to move into. Being able to string together those ones in a DAG that's part of your part of that cloud platform would make sense as well.
The only thing I think is challenging there is that like Snowflake has tasks and streaming, and then Databricks has its own, you can set up its own workflows and job flows essentially. The one issue that I think often kind of people run into there is like, you still end up needing an orchestration layer outside of that, because if you generally don't purely use just that. So if you've also got whatever it is, other solutions that you're using to ingest, all these other layers in there, you end up needing something that orchestrates all of those other components anyways. And then you need to be like, okay, there's certain missing components. And then that's the hard thing, is it? Go ahead.
I think you're right. It's the orchestrator of orchestrations. There you go. So there we go. We've named it. That's the new thing coming out 2024. But you're right, because it's again, when you're living in this world as an engineer, you just see your piece of the parts. So, you could have downstream dependencies. You may not want to be able to send the details at a certain time, or it may have to go via a hop somewhere else, especially if you're using Databricks for your data science is going to do your suggestion engine that comes on top of it. So it's but for a lot of the simpler implementations of the modern data stack, and again, because of that complication of having all those moving parts, I think the more these vendors, and they're all looking at getting market share, if they can accelerate the delivery. There we go. A shout out from Kent. DataOps Live. So that's a great tool. Shout out to Kent, the data warrior. I've missed a few other people, so maybe I'll shout out to a few while we pause. Otherwise, so shout out to Mehdi, shout out to Dan. There's a few LinkedIn users. I don't know who they are, but JJ from London. We've also got Donald from Michigan as well. So lots of shout outs there. But I mean, it's a good point Kent brought up as well. is there's many pieces of the puzzle that you need to do for your deployments of your full pipeline as well. So managing all those different environments and versioning of that as well. So yeah, I think that's definitely where Data Ops Live helps with that.
Yeah, and I like that you brought up, the fact that like for some light implementations, you don't often need too much. Like I actually do have like a few clients where I think I set up maybe 3 or 4 tasks on top of their ingestion layer that's running their transform, and it's been operating now for like 2.5 years. And every once in a while they'll ping me and be like, "Oh, we need to make a small change, whatever, add a column." But honestly, that's once every year, and they're fine, and some people are in that case, and they figured out how to add columns themselves now. So, there are some people, you don't need all the tools all the time. Sometimes it's like, look, if you have something that's the equivalent of a cron job, which is essentially what tasks can act like inside of your Snowflake instance, it's like, that might be all you need, and that's fine. You don't need more.
Yeah, definitely. So I think we've neatly gone on to that really as well. So so some predictions summing up for the cloud data wars. We'll see them probably providing a bit more orchestration for jobs in it. We'll probably see them supporting external storage a bit more, and maybe one of them will actually have some default catalog, which is, again, I think with tagging within Snowflake, it's getting there to some degree. There is metadata that's capturing some of the column information, but so next one is ETL versus ELT versus streaming and CDC wars. So a lot of acronyms there. So I'll start off. Everyone's being I started my days back in the ETL world, and that was the default pattern. And I think we did come back to the world of ETL. Also, ETL's come back a little bit recently. We're looking at some use cases. Streaming's been around a while, and CDC's it's making some headway. So what do you see happening in that space in 2024?
Yeah. I mean, I think most people would laugh and kind of a little bit say, like, did ETL ever truly leave? Right? Like, because it always ended up being. I think we all obviously probably did take like the EL part, and that part makes sense to a degree. It's like, okay, we load the data into raw, whatever, but the amount of T's and loading and moving around that happen after that still occur. And because to me, the proposed benefit of ELT would be that you've loaded the data and now anyone can use it the way that it is, and that's the speed that you get. But it's like, but that's not there. You still need to add this layer of transform, this cleanup. So you haven't escaped that process, which is what I think the goal was. And sometimes it takes some time to fully see that. So I think people are figuring that out. I think I do still like having the data like raw there and not having to figure out all the compute in the actual layer of your ETL, the data pipeline tool at all. But some people like that. Some people do prefer doing it on that side. It can be cheaper on the compute side. What was the second part? So it's kind of
streaming versus CDC.
I think people are like, there's a lot of solutions now that work well. Obviously, like I've partnered with Estuary for that reason. Like they've worked well. I think the thing that I've found as well there is that even though it's cheaper from a standpoint of technically, right? Like, okay, now you can do it. Like now it's a click away, you can do it. The trade-off still is like, especially if you're using Snowflake, you will still pay more if you stream it, right? Versus if you batch it. Because if you're streaming it constantly via some external tool, the way Snowflake is set up in terms of how it charges you is that it will charge you essentially for that minute, if you've set the idle time to a minute, every time. So if you've got 60 rows that you want to load and you load them every minute, you pay for all of it, versus if you just batch it at the end of the hour. And you just pay for that. So there's still this cost, at least if you're using a pay for compute method. If you're not, you have that benefit. You don't have to pay for the compute, and you get the benefit of just loading it straight in and having it live. I think the other thing is, like, so if you're doing that, there's the Snowflake side. I think there are a lot of solutions where I have people who just need to build essentially an app on top of their current data, like an analytics app or something similar, where they just need to provide someone a little bit of information. And I think they're finding that they can do that pretty easily
Mm-hmm.
with some of these solutions that exist out there, where it's like, oh, we just need to build an API on top of our Postgres instance that does some basic analytics and then provides it back to our application. And so I think there are also options like that are coming out that have been pretty reliable.
I think Kent's point is that the ENL is just the simple part of it. It's all about the T. So you need to have the transformation done at some stage in some way. I think from my view and journey and how I've seen, the default of ETL go into ELT, and then some of the, as with everything, when we move or do that knee-jerk reaction, you lose some of the benefits that you may have not realized you were getting. So with that ETL, it's because the underlying databases weren't up to doing the transformations, and they didn't have that capacity to until the likes of Netezza and Teradata came about, the MPPs, you could start to push it down. But some of the benefits you got from doing that transformation is everything went through your ETL tool. So you actually had that cataloging, you had that column level lineage that was always there by default because everything went through it. And when you needed to, sometimes you could still push down from that ETL tool and go and push that logic down and execute something that was doing the load on the database. And then I think when we flip to the ELT, we were there paying for the compute, for the orchestration to go and run this thing, but we weren't leveraging any of the default transformations that could have taken place, and the benefits you got from that. And then we went a bit CTE crazy, where we think, okay, we'll just create everything as a temp table in there and push it all down to the database because it scales. And then we forgot that the Cloud Fairy didn't exist and didn't actually pay the bill. And someone was picking up this large Snowflake cost for something that could have been done on the fly.
Yeah.
And I think the CDC, we work with Strim, but John Cote, he's done some stuff on this, but great guy. But it's all about the data contract aspect. And the problem with that CDC, you're just replicating that data in its form, like for like, which meant that having any dependencies on that data when there could be a source system change, you could break in and think you built the other side. So if we've got CDC with contracts, I see as like a pattern, which is probably going to become more common next year. And I think the other thing is understanding. You mentioned earlier about batching things up, and I think I came up with this sort of like analogy. It's the right time, getting data at the right time for the right purpose. And the example I used was, there's no point having something real time for your accounts payable to go and chase up some aged debt, unless they only chase up on a Friday. There's no point being real time. The other flip side, if you've got a stock controller that's doing predictive stock for some fashion trend that's out there, and there's a volume discount if they actually put in a larger order, but they have to get it by a certain date, the value of getting that information before that date is it has whatever the discount you could have got for that volume saving, that there's an amount there that's going to pay for you to actually have the overhead of that real time. And I think that contractor route of understanding what businesses need to how quickly we get that data, or the frequency of that data, and then some abstraction layer, I think will increase, like CDC being used as a pattern, because you've built that installation. So there you go. I don't know if JJ's asked a question, so let me put this one up anyway on this.
Let's see. How
does the advent of lower cost streaming alternatives like Scientific compare to traditional streaming solutions? So, I mean, the traditional CDC solution's got to it's more used to get the data in there in the first place. You still got to load that data in my view, but I suppose that's not the. if CDC is bringing the data in, if streaming's moving it across, then yeah, dynamic tables that can be triggered to update once the underlying data's changed can reduce probably some costs. It's not a bad pattern.
Yeah, I haven't used the dynamic tables yet, so I don't think I can put too much there.
Okay. Oh, your cat's getting involved.
She is being very. I didn't realize you could hear her. She's being very, very loud. She just wants attention or food.
Yeah, you probably get more viewers. So we've got a cat on here as well. That's it. So I think, and I suppose the streaming part. I suppose I always see streaming as that messaging sort of approach. You're streaming a message through, but I suppose it could be streaming updates from it as well. But I think in summary, there's patterns out there, and go back to the thing is looking at your requirements to understand what's going to be the right approach for you. And I think keep it simple to start with would be an advice, and then
and
then build up.
Prove that it works. Prove that
exactly.
It works first. Don't overcomplicate things. Prove that you can deliver it once every week. Then you can try proving it once every day. Then you can prove it once an hour or something.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose it's leading nicely onto that is, once we're extracting this data, transforming this data, loading this data, we need to put it into a data model. And I think I glimpsed at our show that we did with Joe back in wherever it was. And I think we were both banging on about data modeling back then as well. And I think since then, there's been a much bigger focus on data modeling and different approaches. I don't think we can ever get anyone to agree in the data world of it, but leading on to keep it simple, stupid as well, which is Kent's comment there. But so how are you seeing? We've all seen this modern data stack getting blamed for the complication, and we're just getting just a bunch of tables. The JBot approach. And some other versions of that. Have you seen in the past few years? Have you seen there being more of a focus on data modeling with your clients and your customers?
I've had a few who've definitely tried to they understand the importance of it. Like even as I'm building things, they're like, hey, we're making sure to build something that's maintainable, robust, something we can add more to or take away. So I think some people do take that into consideration. I think what's happened is that these tools have made things easier, which is not always right. Easy is good if it's used correctly, right? If you're just building things, if you're just building DBT models to build quickly, it is you are still building a system of data that if in the future is relied upon, is as strong as its weakest link, right? Whichever, if one of those tables wasn't built to be around for more than a few weeks, months or something. It was just kind of like, oh, we need this now. We don't need this later. And now it's being used 3 years later. And, no one really knows how it's being populated. That is a risk, right? You've introduced that risk. Tools that make things faster just make it easier to make bad decisions faster, right? Okay, now you can make more decisions faster. Some of those can be bad. And so I think that's generally the trade-off and the complexity that's come from it. It's okay, more things are not necessarily better. More reliable things is what the goal is, but it's hard to sometimes pause, especially when you have people who are being pushed or, maybe didn't have someone to be there and tell them to slow down and maybe think through their systems. I often use the example because when I started in the industry, Tableau was, kind of going gung-ho and everyone was using it. And I think within the first job out of school, I built 10 different dashboards that were decently complicated within a month. And I didn't think about what the impact was. I was like, oh, I've done it. It's, look at this. They're cool. They're pretty. They're all great. And then you start realizing, okay, but now you have to maintain these things. And people, are going to start relying on them, and how the data behind them is also important, and all these things. So just because you can build things faster doesn't mean that's what you want to do. You need to build things that people want to use, are reliable, and will be around for a certain period of time that you figure out is useful. I
think sustainability, extendability is the two I like to use. But something you reminded me of a joke is that computers have increased the speed of bad decisions more than tequila and handguns.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. You know, I mean, that's sometimes how I feel a little bit about like ChatGPT or any of those kind of co-pilots. It's like, okay, now we can do things faster. Is that good? Right? Like, is that a good thing to be like, less governance? Is that the end goal at the end of the day? So
and that's another thing linked onto. I did a post about this, and I was asked, the link between governance and modelling, and without any model at all, we got no chance of governing it. But with over governance, you got no chance of actually getting anything modelled in the end. So it's having that balance and understanding that without having that catalog, that model, that's that traceability to what you've got, you haven't really got anything, because the person goes, it's no longer an asset, it becomes a liability. And I've seen so many migrations where you go into it and they go, we've got 45,000 OBIE reports or business audit, and we've got to migrate them all. Again, have you checked the last time these things were actually run? Have you done some lineage? Are they all coming from the same place? When was actually the data refreshed of the things that actually these reports sit on top of? So I think the comment you made of, if when it comes too easy, you create a mess. And the modern data stack, it became too easy to go and run up very large bills in the cloud without understanding the consequence of it. It became quite easy to run up and running a team of data department that then also get questioned the value you're getting from it. We're all working really hard, all maintaining all these things, but they haven't been given the right direction of what they're actually performing may already exist, rather than duplication, extending things are there. You need a data model for that. So have you what would be your, Kimball was mentioned in the chat earlier on, and I cut my teeth on Kimball data modeling. And I still think it's very relevant in this modern day as well. But how have you seen? What's your default go-to? What are your patterns for data modeling? If you're for
I mean, obviously, there's always a slight "it depends" model or "it depends" answer, but I think there is value, like you said, in doing some level of dimensional modeling, whether that's like the end state or not. I think it helps you understand your business, right? And I think that's what these data models are meant to do, is to a degree, is like represent your business and like have you sit there and pause and be like, hey, can we answer the questions that the business even wants? Whether that's because we have the data or don't, whether it's because we have relationships. Sometimes you don't even have the relationships in your data that like let you answer those questions. And that can either, force you to pause and be like, are there things we need to do in the source system to give us this ability, or is it not important to answer these questions? And so I think there's value in doing those like exercises of conceptual and logical, or at least conceptual to a degree, right? Like modeling. So you like understand like what is actually going on before writing, your first line of SQL. And I think that's kind of the thing. So like I like Kimball's always good. It's easy to explain. I think it's the biggest thing. It's like it's very human to understand, I think, dimensional modeling and what it looks like. Does that sometimes like, and this is sometimes I've seen people like do like one big table versus Kimball. It's like a lot of times I just see people take Kimball and stick one big table on top anyways. So that's why I've always been like, is it really a versus? I often see people do both because there are benefits to both. Like if you have one big table and 5 of your tables fail in updating, but some of your tables didn't, you can have some ability to still work off the stuff that did update. And there's a ton of things there. But I do like that. It's easy to understand, and it gives you the ability to build, at a decently fast pace, right? Like it's not slow. It's not the end of the world, but I know there's plenty of people who are like, no, you just stick it in a data lake, a data swamp, and figure out data modeling later. But
and
I think we've agreed that doesn't work fully.
So that's something we can say for sure that I think everyone agrees on now. And I always use it's like pragmatism for your purism, and it's the right approach for the right scenario. I'd always do like especially with all the BI tools, and if that's to explain to the end client. With those, with a nice dimensional model, you can answer, and it's very easy with either a bus matrix or business matrix to say, what questions I can answer based on the dimensions that are able to either cross data marks sometimes as well, to give you that ability to aggregate at different levels and on different fact tables, but also what questions you can't answer, and then what you'd have to add for it. I loved having a conceptual and logical model to talk to business with. I think without that, it may not having one it's still possible to achieve the end goal. It'll take much longer, and you'll have too many people that are even just hung up on terminology that you've called different entities. No, that's a vendor. No, that's a customer. Oh, we could be both. Oh, it's a party with a different persona, maybe.
There's the party. Well, now I'm trying to remember the party something role. Yeah, there you go. Party role.
Yeah, and I think
I've got David C. Hayes somewhere here.
And it's do you see Data Vault much in your area, in your industry? Well, sorry, in with your clients.
Yeah, I've seen it here and there. I've had one client where they kind of rolled it back because it was one of those things where, and I think if I recall, I don't know if it was Veronica or who said this, but Data Vault's one of those things that you should do if you've done it before. Yeah. So it was like one of those cases where I've had to roll back someone else's and kind of just build a simpler kind of dimension, just straightforward kind of data warehouse, because of the fact that it was going to take too long. It's like, all right, you've tried this, it's not gone the right way. Like, let's just build something that you can manage. So I think that's the thing there. Is like, I've seen it a few times, but I think most of the time the advice I've heard is like, you can implement it, but make sure you worked on an implementation before.
And I think it go back to that requirement. It needs to warrant the overhead needed to do it, or get that in there. And we've seen some large scale transformations where you need to have predictability that things can build on top of something before it's even migrated. You're able to bring these two sources into a common entity. So it's in the right environment, in the right scenario, then I think it's a good pattern. But again, if you haven't done it before, definitely seek advice from your local data specialist.
I believe Kent is listening, so he can.
He's out there, out there as well. I think So data modeling, we'll have to wait for what Joe's book's going to reveal and all of that. So yes. I know he's unpacking and demystifying that world at the moment. So I think we're on to our last topic, which I suppose is one of it's actually going to be the talk in the new year. I've got the next show. We have 2 weeks off, but we're going to have a Carl Evo on, and we're going to be talking about the big four versus the boutique wars and that. So, and I have to say, great work you did on you did a little some content for the consultants, of your templates and everything. So and I think by that, I think what you're saying, some of your posts, you're supporting some of the little guy, the David and Goliath sort of approach. But how do you see the future of panning out for people going with the big four over going more boutique nowadays?
I mean, I think there's arguably value to both, but I think I do think if you're thinking about consulting, one, it can be very lucrative because of the big four, because they have decided to be so expensive. You can you could arguably charge half of what they're charging per hour for some of their consultants and still make considerably more than the consultant who's doing the work themselves. It's like I remember I saw someone do a breakdown somewhere where it was like, here's why it costs $300,000 to get like 4 Looker dashboards from someone, and they have to have so much staff that has to be occupied all the time. I mean, you run a smaller but still pretty hefty size consulting company, right? Like you need to keep that engine going, which can be very difficult. And so if you kind of have to put people on projects, whether they're needed, whether they're not, when you're a big four in particular, right? You don't want people on the bench. And the other trade-off, if you get like a bunch of boutique consultants, especially if they're used to working together, is you get people who often really like, they're doing it because that's what they've been doing probably for a decade or even a few years to, you're not getting someone who's doing it for a few years, probably, needs all the support that comes with working for a Big Four, because they do have all the support. That is always, I will say, a benefit. It's like, yeah, they've got the back office that is there. If you're a smaller consulting company, it can be a little bit harder to handle contracting and all those things. I've redlined way too many contracts and asked for plenty of concessions to be made where it's like, yeah, I don't have cameras on premises or a badge system, so thank you for putting that in a contract. So like, but yeah, I think people will see that there's value in hiring more boutique consultancies, because that's what they do, especially people who focus on just doing like whatever it is, data analytics, LLMs. You can literally focus on a specialty and deliver it well, because you're not trying to do volume. You're not trying to enter to a stock price. You're just trying to maybe pay your few workers and do your job well, because that's what you love doing. So,
yep. Yeah, I think the a couple of points there. I used to like to use this term is, we're small enough to care, big enough to deliver.
Exactly.
Which and you can't say that about the Big Four. I don't think they care as much. And I think the other thing you mentioned is having people all know how to work together. And I know you've worked with, when you've done your projects, you work with known people. It's easy for you to know what to expect, what their skills are, and how to get the best out of everyone. And everyone, no arguing, no I've seen this in permanent organisation. Who's got the better title? That's my job. That's part of my role description. You should. All that just goes away with getting in a team that have the battle scars together, knows how to operate as a team. I think it is a team sport, building pipelines. It's not just a individual game. It's everyone working together to the best of their abilities. I think there's been more like bad press with some of the Big Four and failed implementations, or as you said, over allocating staff on project, or giving bad advice that then they go and build on top of with their own people as well. So we're seeing as well in large organisations, having that continuity of someone that can do your design as well as actually oversee the delivery of that and have a level of accountability. Whereas I think that's the key word, is that trust factor. And whereas before people went with the Big Four because you wouldn't get sacked for going for the well-known name. I'm not going to name them now for fear of being sued. But we've been there before, haven't we, Ben? Anyway, that was, I think, on the other one. I think I badmouthed the CEO of a large organisation last time, but I didn't get sued for that one anyway. So I'm not going to fall in that trap again. But it's. I think there's other options out there now, as Ben mentioned. Going for going to the individual contractor market, going to boutique consultants that specialise in this stuff, is probably going to give you more, or reduce your risk more, and actually reduce your costs more. Probably speed up your delivery, because we've seen it, done it.
Yeah, and that's why I kind of also built and this is why I started putting out content on it. It's like I built the community around other technical freelancers, and that's really part of the goal. Is look, if when you start writing bigger contracts, if you put just yourself on that bigger contract, you're for $300,000, this is what I'll do, or whatever, $1 million, whatever your end contract is, even if it's cheaper than the Big Four, even if you can deliver better, they're going to look at that and be like, you're going to charge us how much for you? So there's often this need to it's nice to have multiple people, working on projects with multiple people, make it so much easier. It just makes it so much easier. But two, it does make your pitch to a company far more appealing, because you show hey, I understand that, not only do I need to do the technical work, I need to do the change management work, right? I brought someone on there on here to do that work. And so having a community of people that can kind of come in and be like, hey, I have a project. I'm going to need a person that does this, and you can kind of work together to put together that proposal, and you get a bunch of specialists. I think a lot of people are using kind of that SWAT team mentality now, versus just a bunch of people who are just starting in their career. that is such a good trade-off, right? And again, you will likely get them considerably cheaper than a Big Four or even other consulting companies. I've seen people who are, getting charged $500 an hour or $700 an hour for their time, and they're getting paid maybe $50 to $75 dollars of that an hour. So there's a big arbitrage. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. You don't always get what you pay for. So so that old term of reassuring expensive, it's not always the case. And I like the term, your SWAT team, and I used to use the term like T-shape, T-shape being that good broad thing. I think later on I moved up to pie-shaped, having two strands down of deeper knowledge, maybe one straight and one like a pie, so slightly crossing over, but having that more rounded knowledge. So I'm going to add an extra one in because we got 5 minutes, and it's something that, again, it's close to my heart, and we touched it at the beginning, is I think the rise of the architect role coming back a little bit more. And I think we've everyone, all these roles get reinvented over the period, and where the line in the sand is. And I had Jay Palmer on the show the other day talking about the value of a data architect, or what you provide. And do you see? I mean, obviously you're senior, you've been doing data engineering, but you've moved more into you've moved out in that architecture space of giving that oversight of that. Do you see that becoming more seen in organizations of people having that architecture role again?
I do think people are at least I think for many companies it's never fully left. Like for larger companies, I don't think it ever fully left. I think maybe smaller companies that were trying to be more nimble and perhaps built a little more of kind of just a system that worked and now is difficult to change, are starting to maybe realize that someone having some level of architecture experience is important. Again, it goes back to kind of the tool reference where it's tools are great. They make things easy. But if you just kind of build, right, just because you have a nail gun and now you can shoot more nails faster, you can still build a bad house, right? You haven't solved the design problem or the architecture problem. And so I think that's the thing. It's we have, if we get same analogy with houses, we have plenty of tools that make building houses easier. You still need someone to come in and plan it, right? That has not changed, and that won't change. So there's still this level of planning that is required because you're building something that is complex, that is big, that has a lot of possibly moving pieces, and you will need someone to take a pause, take a moment, and be like, all right, here are all the requirements. Here's the data. Here's here's who it's going to need to serve. Based on that, based on all these needs, based on who it's serving, based on the restrictions we have, budget, goals, team talent. Here's how we can move forward. Here's some overlying principles we should use. Here's the tools I think we should use. Here's the standards I think we should use. And even answering the question, should we use a data vault? Should we use, a different methodology? What data modeling practice should we use? Answering all of that, having someone that can have that vision and answer all that, I think is helpful.
Yeah, and then be accountable for the decisions as well. So
yes, exactly. Yeah.
So I think that's been fantastic oversight of some predictions of next year, and we're coming to the end of the hour. Do you want to give a shout? Well, anything you got coming up? What either events you're doing, or how people can get hold of you if they don't already know?
Yeah. I mean, and get a hold of me. Look up Seatle Data Guy. You'll find me everywhere. If I'm not on a platform, probably except for TikTok. I don't really hit TikTok that hard.
Not yet. I'm sure you'll be there soon.
It's just too many places to put content out there. But yeah, you can look up Seatle Data Guy. I do have the kind of technical freelancer academy community that I'm trying to build. So if you're looking to break into consulting, feel free to look into that. I'm helping people kind of figure out how to do that. And then hopefully next year, my goal is to start helping explain how to not just get clients, but really focus on maybe a specific area. Hey, if you want more outbound leads or inbound leads, here's what you can be doing. Here's the exact thing. So always looking to help people there. So yeah, thanks. And also thanks so much for having me on.
I know it's our pleasure. And in fact, we're closed on a high. So this is the last show this year. And thanks for agreeing on it. And I've been looking forward to this chat. This is how sad I am because I love nerding out on these things, and you're always very insightful what's going on. So yeah, thank you for coming on the show. So, are you at Day-to-Day Texas?
I haven't planned to, but maybe I should. I should at least lurk on the outside. I don't think I've
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Well, I'll be there. Quite a lot of the familiar faces, the usual suspects.
A lot of familiar, yes.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, we're back in 2 weeks' time. Next show, going to have Carl Evo on there, where we're going to be talking about. I'm going to be diving more into that last topic, which was the cloud data wars. So, not the cloud. Sorry, dive into the consultancy wars. The big four.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Until next time, I'm sure our paths will cross again. Thank you very much, Ben, and we'll catch up again soon. I'll end the show.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.